They expected fire. They expected fleets of steel, swarms of missiles, and the thunder of war. But when humanity finally arrived at the heart of the Galactic Empire, none of that came. The humans brought no armadas, no ultimatums, no banners of conquest. They walked into the Emperor's halls with steady steps, eyes calm, and hands empty. The alien lords laughed at the audacity until the laughter died. For it was not rage that unsettled them, not threats, not weapons. It was silence. It was patience. It was the unshakable weight of a species that had suffered more than war could ever inflict. In that moment, the galaxy learned a truth it was never meant to face. Humanity did not come to fight. They came to end the game entirely. And so the question remains, what is left of an empire? When war is no longer its greatest fear. The morning began like so many others, quiet, still, and deceptively ordinary. Commander Elias Kalin stood on the observation deck of the research vessel Horizon's Wake, watching the stars drift by in cold silence. To him, they were not just points of light. Each one was a reminder of humanity's promise, that no matter how far they traveled, no matter how hostile the void became, humanity would endure. He wasn't a warrior. Not by training, not by nature. Elias was a scientist, a cartographer of the unknown. His life had been devoted to mapping the cosmic seas, marking safe passages for colony fleets, ensuring that explorers found not only new homes, but new hope. And yet, hope was fragile out here. He rubbed his temple as the ship's AI cycled through the day's reports. Supplies running lean, hull stresses from the last warp jump, crew fatigue after 6 months away from Earth's networks. Ordinary problems. Manageable ones. But beneath the ordinary was something else. Something that kept him awake at night. For weeks, Horizon's Wake had been picking up fragments of transmissions. Not random static, patterned, structured, deliberate. Signals carrying a cadence that spoke of intelligence. At first, Elias dismissed it as remnants of forgotten probes, perhaps echoes from other explorers lost to time. But the more he listened, the more undeniable it became. Someone, or something, was out there. And they were not hiding. Elias hadn't told the crew everything. Not yet. He wanted to shield them from the weight of what those signals meant. Humanity had always whispered of first contact with awe, sometimes with fear, sometimes with hope. But now, standing in the silence of the observation deck, he felt something else entirely. Inevitability. It was not if, it was when. He turned from the stars as the hatch slid open. Lieutenant Mara stepped inside, her uniform rumpled, eyes red with exhaustion. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Not really," Elias admitted. He tried for a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. She joined him at the glass, following his gaze. "You're listening to the signals again, aren't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look on her face said she already knew. For a moment, they stood in silence together. The stars wheeled on, uncaring. And then, as though summoned by unspoken fear, the deck lights dimmed. A soft tone pulsed through the ship's systems, the kind of alert that meant this is no drill. Elias's heart clenched. He moved to the console, hands flying across controls. The data poured in. Massive energy signatures spiking in the sector ahead, structured formations aligning in space. Not signals, not whispers. Ships. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The galaxy had spoken, and humanity's first answer had already arrived. Elias stared at the readings, his throat dry. "So it begins," he murmured. Mara swallowed hard. "Should we wake the others?" Elias shook his head, even as dread knotted in his stomach. "Not yet." They don't need fear. They need calm. He whispered the word again, almost to himself. Calm. It was a strange thing to cling to when standing on the edge of history. But Elias understood something the galaxy did not. Not yet. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its weapons, its fleets, or its armies. It was its patience, its ability to endure storms without breaking, to look into the face of annihilation and stand unflinching. And so, Elias Kalen, scientist, explorer, reluctant commander, straightened his shoulders as the shadow of the Galactic Empire fell across his ship. He did not reach for weapons. He did not prepare for war. Instead, he breathed, steady and unyielding, as the unknown loomed closer. Because deep down he knew humanity hadn't come this far to start wars. They had come for something far worse, something the galaxy was not ready to face. The fleet appeared without warning. Dozens of alien warships broke from the darkness, their hulls alive with shifting lights, their weapons already primed. The horizon's wake was a single, fragile ember caught in a storm. Commander Elias Kalen stood on the command deck, his crew frozen in stunned silence. No one dared speak. Even the AI's automated warnings seemed muted, as though the machine itself was afraid. And then, the voice came. Harsh, metallic, wrapped in arrogance. The universal translator struggled to keep pace with the alien dialect, but the meaning was clear. Vessel of unknown origin. You trespass within the domain of the Galactic Empire. Power down, surrender, and prepare for immediate boarding. Resistance will result in extermination. Mara's face paled as she glanced at Elias. What do we do? The ship had no weapons worth mentioning, no fleet waiting in hidden orbit. Humanity's first encounter with a galactic power had not come on Earth's terms. It had come now on this lonely stretch of stars, with one research vessel and a handful of souls. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Elias's hands tightened on the rail before him. He breathed slowly, steadying himself before answering. We don't fight, he said. His voice was calm, but the calm was a steel mask. Not with weapons. The crew looked at him as though he had gone mad. But deep down, Elias understood something these aliens did not. Wars were predictable. Empires thrived on them, planned for them, won them with overwhelming force. Humanity had never been strongest in wars. Humanity's power lived in the shadows between battles, in the quiet defiance, in the stubborn refusal to break when all seemed lost. Patch me through, Elias ordered. The comms officer hesitated, then obeyed. 1,000 alien eyes turned toward a single man on a fragile human ship. Elias spoke into the silence. We will not power down. We will not surrender. And we will not resist. The translator carried his words, crisp and unshaken, into the enemy fleet. Confusion rippled across their channels. The aliens expected pleading. They expected panic. They expected rage. Instead, they found stillness. The Empire responded with fury. Energy beams lanced out, striking across the void, but not to destroy. No, these were surgical shots, precision attacks to cripple the ship, to show dominance. The horizon's wake shuddered under the blows, consoles sparking, alarms screaming. Crew scrambled, sealing bulkheads, patching ruptures, fighting to keep the vessel alive. And through it all, Elias remained unflinching. Stabilize life support, he ordered. Keep communications open. They need to see we're not afraid. Not afraid, not broken, not even angry. The galaxy could not comprehend it. Hours dragged on as the Empire's fleet surrounded them. Boarding ships clamped against the hull, their airlocks sparking open like the jaws of predators. Armored soldiers poured inside. towering beings of steel and fire, their eyes glowing with contempt. The humans did not resist. They raised no weapons, fired no shots. Instead, they met their captors with silence. Calm, steady gazes, unflinching eyes. The Empire's soldiers expected panic. Instead, they found patience, and patience was far more dangerous than rage. Elias walked at the front as they were marched into the alien flagship. His crew followed, each step echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. The corridors were immense, carved from living metal, lit with a cold blue glow. Alien banners hung from the walls, symbols of power and conquest. And yet, for all the grandeur, Elias felt something hollow in it. These were rulers who knew only domination. They had never faced an enemy who refused to play the game. The Emperor's chamber was vast, a cathedral of machinery and shadow. At its heart, upon a throne of pulsating crystal, sat the sovereign of the Empire, wreathed in armor that seemed more alive than forged. The aliens spoke in booming tones, their words carrying like thunder. "You are nothing, a primitive people stumbling where you do not belong. You will kneel or you will be erased." The crew looked to Elias, fear burning in their eyes. But his remained steady. He stepped forward, unarmed, unarmored, and stood before the Emperor as though the throne were empty. And he spoke with the voice of humanity. "We did not come for war. We did not come to kneel. We came to endure, to outlast, to remember." The Emperor's laughter was like metal grinding on stone. "Empty words. You have no fleets, no weapons, nothing." But that was the miscalculation. That was the Empire's blindness. For humanity had never needed the greatest fleets to win. Humanity had always found victory in places empires never looked, in whispers, in patience, in the unbroken will to survive long after the conqueror's fire had burned out. Elias smiled faintly, though it was not warm. It was the smile of inevitability. "You mistake us," he said. "You think we need armies to end you. But what we bring is far worse than war." The chamber went still. The alien nobles, the soldiers, even the throne itself seemed to pause. "What could be worse than war?" the Emperor sneered. Elias did not answer directly. He let the silence stretch, heavy and unbearable, because silence itself was the weapon. The aliens did not understand it yet, but they would. Humanity's calm was not surrender. It was the patience of a species that had clawed its way through extinction again and again. It was the calm of survivors who had endured ice ages, plagues, genocides, and still risen stronger. It was the calm of a predator who did not need to strike first, because it knew the prey would eventually falter. And as the Emperor's laughter echoed, as the nobles jeered, as the guards loomed closer, Elias stood unflinching, waiting. The storm was coming. The galaxy did not yet know it, but humanity's silence was not weakness. It was the countdown. And when it broke, the stars themselves would tremble. The Emperor leaned forward, voice dripping with arrogance. "Then show us, human. Show us what your silence hides. Show us what you think is worse than war." The guards raised their weapons. The chamber darkened. The crew braced for annihilation, and Elias Kalin whispered the words that would change the galaxy forever. Very well. But when you see it, remember, you asked for this. The alien throne room trembled with the weight of power. Weapons hummed, soldiers raised their rifles, and the Emperor's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Show us, human. Show us what your silence hides." Elias Kalin did not flinch. He stood alone beneath the vast cathedral of alien steel, dwarfed by the towering sovereign and his guard. His crew huddled behind him, hearts pounding, breaths sharp and shallow. The galaxy itself seemed to lean in, waiting. And Elias whispered, calm and steady, "You asked for this." The soldiers fired. Bolts of searing energy split the air, but they struck nothing. For the ship's systems, long prepared, had surged alive, not with weapons but with transmission. From the horizon's wake, a signal leapt outward. Not a blast of war, but a cascade of truth. Images, histories, memories, compressed, encrypted, unleashed. In an instant, the Emperor's flagship became the epicenter of a storm not of fire, but of knowledge. Every console flickered, every screen lit up, every implant, every neural relay within the chamber pulsed with alien data streams colliding against something utterly foreign. The story of humanity. Not propaganda, not threats. Raw truth. The rise of a fragile species from dust and ruin. The long march through famine, plague, and endless war. The quiet stubbornness that kept them alive when extinction seemed certain. The calm endurance of men and women who buried their dead, mourned their losses, and still pressed forward. The Empire's nobles staggered as the flood of human history tore into them. They saw burning cities, yet rebuilding hands. They saw oceans crossed on fragile wood, and skies broken by wings of fire. They saw a planet that had tried 1,000 times to kill its children, and failed every single time. The sovereign roared, struggling against the tide, but his own throne betrayed him, the neural lattice linking his consciousness to the Empire's fleet. Humanity's truth streamed into every connected ship, every linked officer, every system that prided itself on control. And for the first time in millennia, the Empire's order cracked. Because what humanity had brought was worse than war. It was the idea that empires could fall. Soldiers dropped their weapons, trembling as visions of hopeless battles, yet stubborn victories, flashed through their minds. Admirals in orbit shouted across fractured comms as doubts spread through fleets like wildfire. Fear, once a tool of control, turned inward. Mara clutched Elias's arm, her voice a whisper. What did you do?" Elias's eyes never left the sovereign. His voice was quiet, but carried like thunder. "We showed them who we are." The sovereign snarled, surging from his throne, energy crackling along his armor. "You cannot win with stories. We are eternal." But Elias only shook his head. "No empire is eternal, not when it meets humanity." The sovereign charged. The throne's power arced into his frame, a storm of fire and steel bearing down on one unarmed man. The chamber exploded in chaos, guards shouting, weapons flaring, crew ducking for cover. And still Elias stood calm. Because this was humanity's weapon. Not fleets, not armies, but resolve. The unbreakable certainty that when the tide rose, they would not drown. They would endure until the wave itself shattered. The sovereign struck, only to falter. His own soldiers hesitated, their minds fractured by the flood of human defiance. His own systems stuttered, riddled with the virus of memory he could not delete. In his eyes, for the first time, was something the galaxy had never seen before. Fear. He raised his blade again, but his strike never landed. One of his guards moved first, not against Elias, but against the throne. The chamber gasped as the guard turned his weapon on the very seat of power, firing into the crystal core that bound the Empire's fleets together. The explosion shook the hall, ripping through conduits, cascading failures across every ship in orbit. The sovereign staggered, screaming rage and denial. His voice echoed like a wounded beast. But the damage was done. The Empire's unity collapsed. Fleets faltered, chains of command splintered, and humanity, standing silent and unyielding at the heart of it, became the spark that tore an empire apart. Elias stepped closer to the Emperor, the floor cracking beneath his boots as the chamber crumbled. His voice was low, almost gentle. "You asked what was worse than war." He held the sovereign's gaze, unshaken. The stars were quiet now, not in the silence of death, but in the stillness after a storm, when the air is sharp with memory and every heartbeat feels like a miracle. The human fleet drifted among the wreckage of what had once been an armada meant to erase them. Alien hulls, once gleaming with menace, now floated as broken husks. Fires burned out in the void, sparks scattering like dying constellations. Inside her command deck, Leora sat still. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of survival. Around her, the crew exhaled as though they'd been holding their breath for hours. In truth, they had. They had gambled against annihilation and won. But the victory was more than tactical. It was a declaration. Against a galaxy that had dismissed them as fragile newcomers, humanity had shown its teeth and its heart. The comms began to flicker alive. Not human voices, but alien transmissions, carried on fractured frequencies. First whispers, then questions, then silence. They had seen what had happened here, and they did not know what to make of it. The galaxy had underestimated humans, and now it could not forget them. Leora rose to her feet, gazing out at the battlefield beyond the viewport. "We're still here," she whispered. The words weren't meant for her crew. They weren't even meant for the galaxy. They were meant for Earth, for every farmer, every teacher, every child staring up at the night sky, never knowing how close that sky had come to burning them away. Her crew looked at her, exhaustion etched deep into their faces. But behind that exhaustion was something brighter, something unbreakable, hope. And in that moment, she knew. This was not the end. It was the beginning. Because stories spread. The surviving aliens would carry tales of the humans who would not kneel, of a species that turned desperation into ingenuity and fear into defiance. And across the stars, others who lived under the shadow of empires would hear those tales. They would wonder if, perhaps, they too could stand. The thought made her shiver, not with dread, but with awe, because humanity's victory was no longer just humanity's. It was a spark, and sparks, when carried far enough, could set fire to the stars. Her second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Ishan, broke the silence. "Commander, what now?" She looked at him, then at the weary faces of her crew. Now? Now they rebuilt. Now they remembered the fallen, the names of those who had bought this future with their lives. Now they prepared, because the galaxy would not stay quiet for long. But they would face it, together. She finally answered, her voice steady. "Now, we show them who we are." Outside, the human ships realigned, gathering into formation. Not scattered survivors anymore, a fleet. And as they turned their bows toward home, the stars seemed to shimmer with new meaning. The galaxy had thought humanity would break. Instead, they had risen. And in the stillness after battle, in the quiet where futures are written, one truth became certain. The question was no longer if humanity could endure. The question was what humanity would become. When the universe finally understood that we would never yield, the stars would never be the same again.